Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 64.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Show. Issue number, this time I'm getting it correct because I always get it wrong, and I did the ingenious thing of writing it down. 64. Right now?
Right. That is right.
And now,
you don't have to
tell us what's going on.
All right, what's going on, everyone? Please look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell so you get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. But tonight we're live, and I'm excited. We've got a great guest on. Decades of work, just prolific in his fields, gentlemen. Let's dive into this one.
Prolific and eclectic. Now, this guy has been everywhere. And before this show's over, this guy has many talents. He's done many things. And he actually, he's actually exemplifies the word hustle. I mean, here's a guy that did not want to work a regular job and just pushed it through the ether and kept on working at it and had a whole bunch. It's like throwing down a bunch of marbles on the floor and coming up. And the guy was literally like an expert on all that and a genius in literally just about everything he did. Playing in a rock band, historian, writer, producer, screenwriter, and an expert on dinosaurs. I mean, this is going to be good, Steve, because finally I'm going to find out what type you really are. I want to know who I'm saying, not Cro-Magnon, man. I want to know what type of blood. I'm going to discover that. But anyways, Steve, what do we got to talk about today's guest?
Now, this is one of the things that this show was set up for is happening today. Because the name Don Glut may not be, massively known in the ether, but by the end of this show, you guys are going to get a full education. And by the way, I am not an expert on his work outside of Marvel, but the two issues that he touched really hard in the Marvel universe.
Yes.
Ramifications, even to this day. I have been waiting so many years to find out some stuff about what he did regarding certain issues. So today, it's a little mini thrill for me. I would have never thought back in England that I would be able to speak to Don, Glut like this. So get ready. We're going to be diving down so many rat holes and finding out so much stuff. By the end of this show, everyone's going to be an expert.
Yeah, and once again, this is a great motivational a motivational talk too, because like I said, Don was a hustler and somebody that was trying to make it in just about anything other than regular job. But these are for some of the people out there listening that might, are stuck in a job or something and they want to get out and they want to pursue something, their dreams and hopes and aspirations. Don is a perfect example of somebody that did it at all costs. So without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Don Glut.
Hello. I hope I can live up to that introduction.
Welcome, Don.
Don, thank you. It's an honor for you to be here. on a recommendation too from Mr. Roy Thomas, because he always said that. He said Don would be very interesting to talk to. And once again, doing some background on you, Don, I mean, it's really remarkable, but you are a testament to hustling, hard work, and making things happen, even when things did not seem they could happen. So why don't you tell us the origins when Mr. Glut was hatched? He wasn't born, he was hatched like a dragon.
Yeah. Well, I was born in on right off an army base in Pecos, Texas. And my dad was had enlisted in the Army Air Corps, I think it was called back then. And my mother followed him out there to Texas. We lived in Chicago. Our family came from Chicago. And then when he was shipped overseas, my mother came back to Chicago. But that's where I was born. And I grew up in Chicago. I was a street kid. You know, I had the leather jacket and all that sort of stuff. And all the stuff street kids do that monster kids usually don't do. And then when I graduated from high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had certain talents that came easy for me. Writing was easy, drawing was easy, you know, all kinds of things like that. And music was easy with me. And my mother asked me, what do you want for a high school graduation present? And I had been corresponding at that time with 3 people. Forrest J. Ackerman, the editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Second, Bob Burns, who was a very talented, well, then he was working for CBS as an editor, but he was also a makeup artist and a photographer. And Ron Haydock. Now, Ron Haydock has become a real cult figure over the years. He was he was a rockabilly musician. He was a novelist. He made movies with Dennis Steckler. I mean, I learned a lot from Ron. And he was the one who told me, you got to hustle if you want to succeed. You got to hustle, Don. So anyway, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. All I know is what I loved music and I loved writing and all these other things. I never thought I'd really taken any one of them as a career. But then I saw, you know, first Elvis on the Ed Sullivan Show and the Tommy Dorsey Show and the Milton Berle Show and the Beatles when they first came on Ed Sullivan. And those girls screaming like that. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be a rock and roll star at that point. So my mother said, okay, I'll take you out to California. You get to meet these people you've been corresponding with, your heroes, you know. And I brought my amateur movies. I had made a lot of amateur movies. That was one of my hobbies. I had a lot of weird hobbies, and that was one of them. And Forrest Ackerman said, you can show them in my house. And I'll invite Bert Gordon over, the producer, who just recently passed away. And so we were showing these movies at Forrest's house. Now, Bert could have said when he watched them, you know, these are nice, why don't you, but don't give up your day job, you know. He was very supportive. In fact, once or twice during the screening, he said, how did you do that special effect? He didn't, and there were just some simple things I figured out on my own. Well, anyway, when it was all over, Forey had a 16 millimeter movie projector set up in his house. And I said, is that your projector? And he said, no. Ray, now there's a young guy named Ray Craig who brought the projector. And I said, is that your projector? And he said, no, I borrowed it from USC Film School where I'm enrolled. He said, what, film school? You can go to a college and go to learn how to make movies. And your homework is making movies? And he said, yeah, I'll take it out of the campus. So look, now I was at that time already enrolled at DePaul University in Chicago. So he took me down to the campus and he showed me around, and I got back to the hotel where my mother was, and I said, I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm moving out to California to go to film school. She said, but you're you're in DePaul. I said, okay, I'll take all my requirements, get them out of the way for the first 2 years, and we'll submit what do you call it when when you want to go to the school and you submit your information, your requests and all that.
Your transcripts.
Yes, and they accepted it. They accepted everything. And it was a Catholic university in Chicago, so they even accepted the religion courses, you know. And so I moved out to California 2 years later. That was 1964. And I've been out here ever since.
Wow. 64 too. That's when the music, talking about being into music, that's when
Those are the best, one of the best periods of my I won't tell you what the third one was, but the first best period of my life, true happiness, was when I was a street kid in Chicago. Second was when I was my rock and roll phase in the Sunset Strip and all, hanging around with all the famous musicians and things, recording sessions and getting paid for it and all that. And that was one of the greatest times of my life. I really miss that.
Yeah, my God, that was probably a hate. That's when like the Doors were there on the Sunset. Did you ever see the Doors?
I used to go to Gazzari's. In fact, we played at Gazzari's, at the original Gazzari's, but at the one on the Sunset Strip. I remember when the Doors and the Buffalo Springfield were the two house bands playing on the same nights, you know, and it was the Galaxy down the street was, you know, the Iron Butterfly.
That was at the Whiskey, right? The Whiskey A Go-Go?
The Whiskey was on the corner, yeah. And I used to hang out there almost every night. I mean, on the Strip. I was a real, I guess I was sort of a hippie, you know, but it was all music then. Everything was music.
That had to be, you know, like, you're an artist and you're a creative guy. That just being with all that music and all that creativity and all that raw genius all around you, you had to be sucking that all up.
Girls, that was, let's face it, that's what the main reason a lot of us got into rock and roll music wasn't because of the money, and we were thinking, you know, being creative artists. It was because of the girls, and there were plenty of them, and they were gorgeous. You know, especially in Southern California. That was some of the reasons I moved out here. On that vacation I took in '62, I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard at night, on the Friday night, and all these pickup trucks were driving by with these guys driving the picture. Everyone had this gorgeous girl sitting next to them. I said, "This is the place I want to be. This is heaven to me." So it was a great period, yeah. And then our producer, the band I played in, I played in a lot of bands, including Chicago, but the one that almost made it was the Penny Arkade, which was produced by Mike Nesmith, who was one of the Monkees. And so we rehearsed at his house 6 days a week. He had a rehearsal studio in his house, and all the musicians and things would hang out and drop by, and we did a lot of recording. We recorded a couple albums that are finally, I don't know if you can see that.
There you go.
There's me. This just came out recently after all these decades. Well, anyway, that's me. I'm the one sitting down. It's kind of hard to, anyway. So, you know, of all the things I've done, writing, acting, whatever, the music gives me the greatest satisfaction, joy, and pride, I think.
Okay, so you're in the music scene now. Where do you go from there?
Well, how did I get there? First of all, because I was in the USA Film School, and I got along with some of the students, but most of the students, with all the students, I guess, in the cinema department, but not with the faculty. And they almost threw me out a couple times because, listen to this, not because my movies were, the films I was making as student films weren't up to quality or anything. It was because of my taste. Because while the other students were making movies about the Vietnam War or just whatever, you know, I was making movies about Superman and monsters and things like that, which they looked down on at that time.
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine
so
that.
I had to take one course over again, which put me back a half a year because I made a Superman movie. And I talked to my instructor. I said, "Why did you give me it was either a D or a C, and you had to give I think a B to graduate." And I said, "Why my film was better than any of the other films in the class? It had special effects, it had dynamic cutting, it had real actors, yada, 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 yada." And he looked at me and he wagged his finger and says, "Yes, but it was a Superman movie." And that from that point on, I took this attitude. I said, I just don't care right now, or at least anymore. And an opportunity came I have a knack for stumbling into opportunities, and opportunities are never wasted. They're just passed on to the next person. And I went with this, and that led to it was somebody told me they saw on the bulletin board of the Musicians Union some band that was starting up and looking for a bass player. And he said, this is probably another one. He says, you end up, playing in weddings and bar mitzvahs and nightclubs. And why don't you try it? So I tried out for it, and it turned out to be the Mike Nesmith thing, and which led to the Mike Nesmith thing. He wasn't in with us right from the very beginning, and again, like I said, doing interviews and things, I don't turn things down unless it's something really lame, if it's legitimate, I'll do it. I'll do an interview. I'll do whatever. And I went with the music thing, and I was in that for a few years. And then when the Monkees were canceled, and Mike lost a lot of his money, I think he had a bad business advisor, and he couldn't afford to pay for us anymore. So I did the next best thing. And I always liked writing, and I'd already written a book while I was in the Penny Arkade. I said, well, I may give this a shot. And I started working on monster magazines. For a while, I edited a magazine called Modern Monsters right out of Hollywood. And then I started working for Forey Ackerman and Jim Warren on Famous Monsters. And then Jim Warren lost some of his writers, and he needed some new writers. And Forey said, can you write comics? I said, well, I'll try. I've always wanted to write comics. And I tried a few things that I said to Charlton, and they rejected. And I said, well, I'll give it a shot. And Warren liked what I wrote. And that's how my comic book career started. We're writing for Creepy and Eerie. And then Vampirella came around. And Forey said, we got a new magazine coming out. It's about a mod witch that she wasn't a vampire yet. Can you come up with some stories? So for the first issue of what became Vampirella #1, I wrote all but 2 stories in the issue. Almost the entire issue was mine. And that's how I cut my teeth on writing comics. Those were and then this one thing kind of led to another. And Rascally Roy was a friend of mine from when we were both fans. And, your friends sometimes bring you into the business. And I made a lot of friends. I'm a great networker, and I'm meeting people all the time. And, some people don't like me, some people do, but the ones that do help me out. And Roy has been so great, because I went through some really hard times a few times. And he always was looking out for me. He was always trying to find some new job for me that I could do. And I learned a lot about writing comics from Roy, how to place balloons and that sort of thing.
Wow. That's great. Go ahead, Steve.
So, obviously, it's that's quite a scene that you've been in, where you're playing in a band and you're playing bass, and there's all these women flying all over the place. And then suddenly you're writing for magazines, monsters, and then, pretty soon you're going to be making maybe a move, especially with contact with Roy, you're going to be getting into some Marvel work. So were you aware of Marvel Comics? Had you tasted any of the Marvel product, or how familiar were you with those guys?
I knew of Marvel Comics since they were Atlas, because when I was a kid, there were the Atlas books, the pre-code horror stories, and Yellow Claw and the Black Knight. I read all those. And then when I actually, before I became a professional writer, before I moved out to California, I became a Marvel fan. And I, collected all of the issues and the continuity. Oh, look at there. Ant-Man is appearing in this issue of Spider-Man. that was a big deal to me. And I had a lot of comic book friends who were fans, and we would sit around and, talk about superheroes and all that sort of thing. So, I, like a lot of people that went on to become professional writers and artists, I was a fan first, as opposed to the old timers who, when they first started out, there were no comics in the literature. They started out as adults or in the case of Joe Kubert, like he was a teenager. But they were making it up as they went along, making up the formats and the genres and all that sort of thing. Well, when I started, those all existed already, and we just, joined the bandwagon.
Man, that was like you were talking about the continuity. That was also fresh, and I'm just saying with the music, with those comics, those mid '60s, especially the '60s, there was so much going on that it was. What I loved about it, it was all real, like it was all fresh, it was all coming, it was all like ground up stuff.
Yeah, and seeing those Universals, I was lucky. I was old enough to have seen all of the Frankenstein movies except the Karloffs in theaters when Real Art was reissuing them. And then that was like 1955, 56. And then in 57, they hit televisions, that Shock package of films. And we had Shock Theater in Chicago. And that's when I saw all the others of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, the Dracula. And I mean, the only Dracula movies I saw in the theater were House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, and The Return of Dracula, and then later on the Christopher Lees. But by that time, they were already being shown on television. But seeing those for the first time, and these are before Famous Monsters came out. Yeah. So we'd see them in the theater, but we didn't have a clue what order they went in. So, well, let's see. In this one, the monster dies in the fire. This one, they find them frozen in the ice. So they connect somehow. That was so much fun for kids trying to figure out all those things and who the actors were. I didn't know who John Carradine was or Lionel Atwill. You learn that as you went along, and now it's all spoon-fed. There are books and magazines and TV documentaries and things. Everybody knows everything. But in those days, you didn't, and that was part of the fun of it.
Wow. That's great. Go ahead now.
So I'm curious though, like I know all of us at some point in time kind of pick a genre and it kind of stays with you. What was it about, the Universal monsters and the horror films that you found so captivating that it stayed with you?
I think, well, first of all, the first two of them that I saw in the theaters were House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, which completely threw me off because I went to see House of Frankenstein. I thought Boris Karloff played the monster. That's what we were always told. And the first thing that comes on the screen, Boris Karloff's name. Okay, great. And then you see a circus wagon going by. There's a skeleton of Count Dracula. I said, wait a minute, did they get the reels mixed up? Is this really House of Dracula? And then they show Karloff in the jail cell with the beer. I said, wait a minute. I thought he plays a monster in this. So these kinds of things really... I mean, I lost a lot of sleep trying to figure these things out before we know what anything about them, And but one of the things two things really struck me about those movies. One was the atmosphere. There was this whole atmosphere of those villages and mountain towns and castles and things. There's an ambiance. Like film noir has its own atmosphere. Well, so did these Universal pictures. And also the continuity, the Wolfman turning up in the Dracula movie, and stuff like that. I found that absolutely fascinating. And that, along with the similar continuities in like the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels that I was starting to read, a lot of the work I did later on in my own novels, where I would bring characters from one novel into the other, or my own movies, or to have guest appearances by one character, and I just have a great time doing that. And I don't know how many people watching the movies or reading the stories pick up on them because I don't hit you over the head with it and say, hey, look at this, this was from previous book. I let people figure it out. But I think that's part of the fun. And someday, long after I've been assumed room temperature, there's going to be some guy with a lot of time on his hands, some guy living in the basement of his mother's house, wearing a Hawaiian shirt. And he's going to figure out all this continuity because the continuity in my stories spill over to everything, not only from novels to movies to comics, but from comics to different companies. I've got little references in DC Comics to Marvel Comics to Gold Key Comics to Charlton Comics. So it's like this unified glutiverse, if you want to call it that, which some people have. And I just have a great time doing that.
Yeah, that is something that's missing in a lot of writers today. I don't think they even care. See, Don, you come from that generation that cared about the character and the world, knowing that you loved the continuity of the comics and all that stuff. I mean, that's so refreshing to hear. But believe it or not, I'm sure you know that is so it's almost alien today. You don't even get that stuff. But I love hearing it from you, from somebody, and you seem to like it on all the genres. Like that's
I have no idea what's going on in comics now. I haven't probably read any modern comics in maybe
neither me. See, neither do we.
years, maybe more than that. The only comics I read now are reprints of old pre-code horror comics that I get in these collections, you know. And so I don't know what they're doing now, but it was fun. It was really, really fun in those days. And if somebody picked up on it, you know, that was great. I mean, every once in a while today, somebody will say, hey, I remember in this Gold Key story you wrote in 1974, you had this little guest appearance by Jason Blood, who was the demon in a Dr. Spector story. See, sitting there in an audience listening to a lecture, I said, you spotted that? And luckily my editor never spotted these things. But because that means somebody actually got it. Somebody responded to the joke I was putting in or whatever.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now we got to go into it. I don't know if you're going to probably forever be known as a co-creator with our good friend Rick Hoberg, Jane Foster-Thor. You're not going to escape that. That's going to be with you. What did you think first off when I want to know the origins of her and then into the movies and what you thought?
Okay. Rick and I and Roy, we used to throw great parties, okay? And this,
I know.
This was Rick's turn to have a party. And we were all over there, and this is when What If was coming out. And we're all tossing out these crazy ideas, and we're having a few drinks, you know. Rick's wife made great pina coladas. I used to call them When Worlds Coladas. And
he still likes to have a good time.
Yeah, you know, what if Spider-Man had two heads? You know, all this weird, crazy stuff. And then I just, what if Jane Foster, instead of Don Blake, picked up the hammer and became Thor? And Roy said, I think that could work. I mean, this is the way I remember it. And maybe he remembers it different, or Rick remembers it different. But he said, okay, go with it. And we went with it. And I tried to make those early What If stories following the incidents in the early comics as closely as I could, with just slight changes here and there because of the one difference that happened. And so I got all of the Saturn men from whatever they were, I guess they're from Saturn. I brought in all those things, and that was one of those fun issues. I love doing What If. I really had a good time doing What If. And one of them, what if the Avengers had formed in the 1950s? That was really Roy's idea, and he threw it at me. And I said, okay. He said, use any of those characters you want. Don't use Captain America, Submariner, or the Human Torch, because he was going to use them for something. So I brought in like Jan of the Jungle and the Yellow Claw and Marvel Boy and all that. And that's become like, I don't know. I haven't read any of the comics, but it becomes like the Atlas Avengers or something or other.
Yes, the Agents of Atlas.
Agents of Atlas. And they keep reprinting them. They keep sending me volumes and reprinting royalties, which is nice. I'm probably making more money off the royalties of these old comics than I ever did when I writing them. And it's funny now, after all these years, and starting off with the Warren magazines, Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella, that's what I'm doing now. I'm writing, and I'm also the associate editor of Shudder magazine and Vampiress Carmilla. And I think they're horror stories, but they're way better than anything I ever wrote back then. I think they've matured a lot. And they've got enough backstories. I'm stockpiled, maybe about 100, 150. I could die tomorrow, and they would have stories for the next 10 or 20 years they could, publish posthumously. And I'm having a great time doing that.
That's awesome.
Did you ever, but did you ever think that story you threw in a What If was going to be part of this major motion picture? And me and Roy saw your name. We always look for the names too. It was great to see you and Rick in the movie. What do you think?
Rick and I were invited to the premiere.
Oh, good.
And we got paid nicely for that too. So we went to it was at the Chinese Theater, and I had a date next to me on one side, and Rick was on the other side. And we were waiting for the credits to roll up. And I saw Rick's, I didn't see my name yet. I said, Rick's, I nudged him and said, Rick, there's your name. And then I saw my name because they're, I think, alphabetical order. Mine was right before his. And see, yeah, I'll tell you, I've seen my name on the screen before, but usually lesser movies, Carnosaur or Bikini Drive-In, or the movies I made, which don't really count as far as getting your name. But seeing your name in a major motion picture on the big screen at Grauman's Chinese Theater at the world premiere, that made my day.
Rick, I mean, you and Rick do have like a similar personality. I love that you love it, like you enjoy that, like Rick and
I are so basically fans. I think Roy is too. It's something you just never get out of your system. But I just don't read the comics anymore. When they stopped, I think I stopped about the time they stopped printing them on newsprint because they weren't comic books anymore to me. And when they had the multiple covers and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Stories, I remember, in those old comics I read as a kid, like in World's Finest and in Action and Adventure, you get a 6-page Aquaman story or Green Arrow story, 6 pages, and there was so much plot in those 6 pages, not a word wasted. And then I remember once, about the time I stopped reading, I was reading a Superman comic, and the whole story was nothing but him floating there talking to a priest. I mean, that was the whole issue, as I remember. And that's not comics anymore.
Oh, wow. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I want to talk about another what if that you did. A what if that you did such an incredible job on. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but there was a massive debate on whether it was actually what if or actually canon. And that's the what if Captain America hadn't vanished during World War II, which is issue 5. Oh. And for many, many years, those of us who were in the weeds, we began to think of that history that you'd created as canon. And as far as I know, a lot of it hasn't been taken out of continuity. And I think that goes into, what you said of one of your strengths, which is being detail orientated, knowing the original stories, and then putting this story together in a nice, reasonable fashion. But I'm wondering, were you ever aware of the impact of this issue?
This is the first I've ever heard of it. You telling me? It was just, to me, it was just another story.
Oh.
Yeah, well, it was pretty an amazing story, and so it goes backwards and forwards. And right now, the way modern Marvel is, they don't know what continuity is. But you did mention earlier on, of course, that you did the 1950s Avengers with Marvel Boy. But I want to talk about something which is very close to my heart, which is historic in a level that is just incomprehensible to me, and that's Captain America 217. Captain America 217, you have the S.H.I.E.L.D. super agents, and one of those guys is Marvel Boy.
Yep.
And this is the first real appearance of Marvel Boy after the death of the Crusader, of course, that Roy had done. So I'm curious, was this a plot story that was handed to you by Roy, or was this something that came out of a clean copy?
As I remember, when Roy asked me if I wanted to do some fill-in issues of Captain America, I said, sure. I mean, that was like one of my favorite characters. And a character that's so well developed, like Tarzan, that you put him in a story, and the story kind of writes itself because the character knows what to do. And at the time, the story not only had been plotted by Roy, but also had been penciled by John Buscema. So I was given the pencils, and all those names I made up for the other agents. The Blue Streak was named after a roller coaster I used to ride when I was a kid at Riverview Park in Chicago, and the Vamp was just, short for vampire, or the Vamps from the silent movies, combination of the two. And the Marvel Boy, I said, that's Marvel Boy. And I think if I remember right, I think I just gave him this. I think the powers were already in the artwork, so I didn't really come up with any of that. But after that, I did my own plots and things. But that issue was already drawn, penciled anyway. It wasn't inked yet by John Buscema. The only time I ever worked with John Buscema, but I can say I worked with John Buscema once.
Wow. So, but it was you that gave the character Vamp her name?
All those names, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
There was a role. What was the role? There was a roller skating character or what? I can't remember.
Was it Texas Twister was in there too?
Yes.
Texas Twister?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure if I made that up or Roy did, but roller skating was popular back then. All the disco.
Yeah.
That
Well,
was
the funny thing is that you may not be aware because you haven't read modern issues in a long time, but Vamp has had quite a long career. She appeared many times in a book called Deadpool. So Vamp has been going on and on and on. And it was one of my favorite characters. Had a great little backstory, but it was definitely, something very special to me. And I always looked at the name and I was always confused. I was like, wow, where did this guy come from? Where did this guy come from? And he's writing these great issues. So now you've answered that after 70 years, of me wondering, now I know.
Yeah, I'll tell you something else too. The Jane Foster thing, the Thor thing. I don't know how many years ago it was, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. I got a letter from Marvel with all these characters. These are the characters you created for Marvel. And if we make a television show or a movie, this is how much you will get. This is how much you will get, how much money you will get. And I said, what about the Jane Foster-Thor? And the response was, that wasn't really a created character. It was simply taking two characters that were already existing and putting a new spin on them and putting them together. So when Rick and I found out that we were going to get not only invited to the premiere and everything, but get paid nicely for doing that character, it was a total surprise to me. And Marvel didn't have to do that. Marvel's always been, I hear people complaining about working for Marvel. They've always been really, really, really good for me. I get royalties, I get free books, as something to mine in. And so, I loved working with Stan Lee when we were doing Marvel productions, those cartoons in California, and loved working with Roy. I've never had a problem with Marvel, except when Jim Shooter came and then everything changed. But
the Jim Shooter
managed to do something that very, very, very few people right now have been able to do. And that is to be from a certain generation to be working in the comic business right now. Because there you are, you're back there, you're doing the magazines. And by the way, when I saw the magazines first appear at the store, I almost had a heart attack. I was like, oh my word, these are fantastic. Who in the hell is doing this? But 9 times out of 10 in this real cutthroat world right now that we have, for some strange reason, unless you're a 19-year-old person that worked as a barista, you're not going to get hired. So I'm curious, how did you manage to get the call to come and work on that project?
And which project specifically?
The magazines that you're working on now.
Oh, Rich Sala, who was the editor and publisher of those magazines. I was at a convention in Albuquerque, and I'd never met Rich Buckler before, but he was there. We had a table, and I said, I introduced myself. Oh, great to meet you. He said, you should really contact Rich about doing some comics. I don't know if I can write those kind of comics anymore. It's been like 40 years or something. He said, no, give him. So anyway, I contacted Rich, and Rich responded, and he took me out to lunch. And he said, look, what I'm trying to do is recreate the look, the feel, the fun of those old Warren magazines.
Yeah,
I'm trying to recruit as many artists and writers who worked on those original Warren magazines. Right now, I'm one of the only ones that are still alive, and there's a few, but they don't want to do those kind of comics anymore. And we just hit it off, and we talked it over, and I submitted a story to him, and he liked it. He bought it. He got good letters, good response, and that's how I got in. But you're right. There's age bias in just about every creative endeavor, and that's now just not age, it's gender, it's you know, it can be whatever political way you're swinging if they find out, or it could be in your ethnicity, you know. And I'm lucky, but I've always been a hustler. I've never been out of. I've always found something to do and a way of doing it. And this is just another one of those things. I've done a few other comics during that time because people liked what they did in the Warrant magazines, and they contacted me. And I can't remember the titles right now, the magazines, but yeah, I'm always busy. I've always got something to come up. But you're right, the age bias is
it's a very powerful bias right now. It's almost crushing. You know, when I see people like David Michelini or someone like a Roger Stern that aren't working, and they have more talent in their little finger than 5,000 current. I mean, I don't understand it. I don't know what it is. Again, Chris Claremont is another one that's managed to avoid that because he has some friends over at Marvel. But generally speaking, people from a certain era are brushed aside.
Yeah, it's not only that, but the fans. Okay, I haven't done it the last couple of years, but for about 4 or 5 years straight, I did the LA Comic Con, which used to be Stan Lee's Kamikaze.
Yes.
And I have a table out there, and I've got back issues of some of the stuff I've done, and I have them spread out on the table, and people can buy them and get them autographed and all that. And a guy came up to my table, the last one I did, which was about right before COVID. I haven't done any since COVID, but right before COVID struck, I was there. A guy came up to me, he must have been about 25 years old, and he starts flipping through my stacks of comics, and he's puzzled. I said, and finally I said, "What's the matter?" He says, "Oh, I get it now. This is all old school stuff." And I walked around Artist Alley, and I didn't see anybody there that was from like my generation of comics. Nobody from this Bronze Age or Silver Age, nothing. It was all new self-published stuff and jewelry. You know, that's what was it, you know. So people, I mean, Neil Adams had a table there, but then he passed away recently. So he and I were like the only two. And I don't know if the young fans really care about the old stuff anymore. You know, when I was a kid, we cared about the golden age. Wow, the golden age, that's before our time. But those, you know, all these characters like Dr. Fate and Hourman, these were like, you know, mysterious, much desired, much to be sought for books and things. And we wanted to learn about them as much as and collect as many of those as we can. But now, no, you go to comic book conventions, and the only things you see up there for sale are manga or maybe the current issues. That's it. You don't see any golden age. You don't see silver age. You don't see any pre-code horror comics or anything. So I just think it's a generational thing. And I think, you know, everybody's kind of moved on. I mean, there's a handful of collectors who are like in their 50s, 60s, 70s who still remember the old stuff and still love the old stuff. But for the most part, you know, it's manga.
Well, it's actually a very good point that you bring up. And I know that Niall is very aware of this as well. Maybe John doesn't quite know it because he's out of the modern stuff. But in the early 2000s, the actual writing and method of creating the comic books changed. So they stopped speaking in the third person and they started just having art, but there was not much dialogue. So a whole generation of kids came along, you know, and when they read an old issue where Spider-Man's got all that internal dialogue, they can't take it. They're like, why is he constantly talking? And why is he speaking like this? And especially if he's flamboyant.
You know, when you're getting your brains kicked out and you're having a conversation with somebody.
Yes.
You're trying to be at the same time. Yeah, I see what you mean. But you're right. I know for a while there, I think it was in the 80s, you know, back before that, even before that, like in the 50s, most of us kids that I knew, myself included, never read the captions. We just read the dialogue balloons. We skipped over the captions. And then in the 70s, captions became very heavy, especially in Marvel comics. Big blocks. It was almost like an EC comic or something. And and everybody got into that. I got into that too. And then after that, it got back to the captions were just simply to carry to the next panel. Sometimes a piece of dialogue from panel 1 carrying over as a caption into the subsequent panel. And now the stories I'm doing for Warrant, I'm very, I'm very choosy in the captions I put in. I don't want to just have meanwhile ... or presently ... some kind of a meaningful thing. One thing I learned from Russ, working with Russ Manning. I learned as much from Russ Manning as I did from Roy and Stan. Russ wanted, I was writing Tarzan for us, and he said he wanted as much as possible to have every panel dense with information. But dense with information didn't mean text. It meant the artwork showing something that the text isn't telling you, which is telling you something that the dialogue is. So you're getting like maybe 2 or 3 bits of information from one panel. And I try to do that in the stories now I'm doing for the Shudder and Carmilla, Vampiress Carmilla. And I look at some of those old stories back that was from the 80s, especially the Marvel books, and some of those things are just unreadable. There's so much heavy captions that don't really tell you anything to advance the story, except to, to satisfy the ego of the writer. Hey, look what a great writer I am. I know all these words, all these words you gotta look up in the dictionary, and so anyway, they have changed.
Yes, but again, it's I didn't realize that myself until one of my younger employees asked me if there was something good that she could read, and I gave her a trade paperback, and it was a lot. It had some older Avengers from the 70s, and she got a couple of pages in, and she just honestly said, she goes, I can't do this. I don't know why are they talking? Why are the panels moving? I was like, wow. So it was the first time that I've noticed there had been this schism, because generally speaking, from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, basically it was all the same. There was your characters, they're talking in the third person, you got your information, they're moving from panel to panel, the story's progressing. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then in the early 2000s, you started to get whole issues, which is very manga-ish as well, where there is no dialogue. They're just asking you to look at the pictures and have it move forward. And they love that. And I hate it. I cannot, my brain cannot take it. And I'm like, why am I turning 5 pages in 3 minutes? No, where is the dialogue? So we have a schism right now that we've never really had before. And that's why the young generation right now are eating up this manga stuff like wildfire, because they'll just have 4 pages with, some character fighting, and it's just huge words of boom, crash, wow.
And also, when you think of what comic books cost today, to buy 1 issue, and you can go through it in 2 minutes, you're not getting your money's worth as far as I'm concerned. What I try to do now is every story I do, if it's possible, have at least 1 panel with no dialogue or captions, maybe a sound effect, or maybe not even that. Because sometimes you can have, if the artist is good enough, you can have more impact with not saying anything, but not to overdo that. We just once in a while where it's appropriate.
Well, you got to think of kids today, like with TikTok and everything, you got to hold what's the attention span of kids today? So you figure that like those comics, it's perfect for them. They read a couple, let them read an early Conan, one of those things. Let them read a paperback, for crying out loud. I don't think that's even happening either. But I'm just saying, like,
I was doing a radio show a few years ago, and the co-hostess was probably about 22 years old, if that. And we were talking. I was talking to the host. There was the host too, and about movies. And she said she was always emphasizing, my generation doesn't do that. Well, anyway, She said, well, my generation doesn't really watch movies anymore. I said, you don't? What do you do? Well, we all watch them. We have them on. We'll have them on in a room like on a television set, but it's more like a record playing in the background. Once in a while, we look up and see what's going on, but they don't pay attention to the story. I mean, you can't watch a movie like, On the Waterfront or something, where you got to pay attention to the acting and the dialogue and what's going on. It's, you see a CGI effect or something. Oh, that's cool. And that's it. And I had another friend who was a writer, and he was telling me, a screenwriter, it doesn't matter if the story makes no sense, if there's a plot hole in it, as long as the action moves. Because if the action moves, the people are going to watch it.
Good now.
Now we've talked about, your stint with, in the comics industry and everything, but you also had a big part screenwriting for a lot of animation, children's animation. And, how was that journey going into that? Because, from looking at what you've worked on, I mean, I was in love with majority of those shows growing up.
Well, the way I got into it was, the first stuff I did like that, I simply called up Hanna-Barbera, whoever, and I got to do a Shazam show, a live action show. Then the next year I got to do a Land of the Lost, which was live action. Then everything went to animation, and I got a few little gigs here and there. I did most of my work then for Norman Maurer and Joe Kubert, Tor, some of those old St. John books. Norman was also married to Mo Howard's daughter, and was the producer of some of those later Stooges movies, with the ones with Joe Dorito. Anyway, but I was never part of that clique, that animation clique. And then when Jim Shooter came into Marvel, and most of us on the West Coast got let go for one reason or another, and I was one of them. Ralph Cramden said on the Honeymooners episode, no, he was the first to go. Anyway, I probably was. Anyway, so we had to figure out another way of making a living. And the animation business was pretty much down the street from where we all lived. And because we were trained in comic books to think in visual terms, in terms of action and things, and not just like talking heads, we gravitated perfectly into animation. So I did a lot of animation. Again, I was never part of there was like a whole clique of those animation writers. I never seemed to fit in with them. And, but I wrote a lot of them. Most of the stuff I wrote was junk, I thought, because we weren't writing for the kids. If it was a network show, we were writing for the censors, the network censors. Mm-hmm. And every show was a formula. It had to follow the same structure, so that really limited your creativity. And the other reason is if it was like one of the syndicated shows, like Transformers or G.I. Joe, those were half-hour commercials. We were writing those to sell toys.
Right.
And we were told what characters to put in and what characters to emphasize and all that sort of thing. And most of them were, all the same stuff. We weren't allowed to say kill or something. So you always had some guy overacting as the villain. I will destroy them. They were all the same. Basically the same plot. I cranked out a lot of those, and I learned very early on. If you want to do something, like when I was doing those Spider-Man shows, I tried to make them as close to the comic books as I could. Mm-hmm. But I found that if you really try to get creative and do something good, really beyond the normal thing that they were doing on the show, and the story editor said, hey, this is the best script we read all year, chances are you weren't going to get another one because you were a troublemaker. They wanted this common denominator, and when I learned that, coming up a little bit more.
Now, when you got to because you worked on, was it, correct if I'm wrong, the 1992, 1993 X-Men cartoon?
Just one episode.
Oh, just one episode. Okay. Did it have that same formula though, or were they trying to be more?
It was a little bit more There was a little bit more freedom with that one. Glenn Leopold, who was the story editor, said, I want to do the story where Wolverine, and he gave me some basic ideas that he wanted in the story, and I built a plot around that. But I still, I had a big fight between Wolverine and I forgot Sabretooth, and you couldn't have anybody. You got two characters with, claws and all that. How do you have a fight without anybody hitting anybody or anything? Well, I had to figure out a way to do it, and I did. And so I only did an episode of that. I had a knack for some reason, especially at one of the worst times of my life, I was going through an extremely costly divorce. I was literally wiped out financially. And all my friends at Marvel Productions and these are the best stories we've ever written. None of them ever called me. None of them, not one of them. And they all went on to become producers and story editors and directors. They never called me. And Glenn Leopold, who I didn't know, I just called him out of the blue. And he said, okay, all right, I'll give you a chance. And he owned a motorcycle shop, and I was into motorcycles. So, we had another common interest. And he liked the script. But then when I did it, it was the last one. There weren't any more to be had. And, but, I never get invited to they have X-Men reunions and things and conventions and things and parties. I never get invited to any of those things. So I guess there must be something about me that some of those people don't like, but that's okay. I'm still working and most of them aren't.
Yeah, that's great.
There you go.
I'm much older than that too.
Now, Don, your fascination with Frankenstein. Tell me, and all that Universal stuff. How come they always come to you? And tell me why you're so into that and why you have so much knowledge and you've done so many documentaries. Tell me what it is about Universal Monsters, Frankenstein, and your history with the monster.
Well, my interest in Frankenstein started out in a strange way. Not a Glenn strange way, but a strange way. And my grandmother and I were at the Music Box Theater in Chicago, which is a cool place because I had my first one of my theatrical movie premieres at the Music Box many years later. Anyway, we were in the theater. We were watching a movie called Tap Roots, which was kind of a Western. I forgot what it was. But anyway, Boris Karloff was in it playing an Indian. And my mother said, oh, that's Boris Karloff. He played Frankenstein. I never heard of Frankenstein before. I didn't know what she was talking about. So on the way home from the theater, we were walking home. It was about a 3-block walk. I said, who's Frankenstein? She said, oh, it was a man that was brought back from the dead. For some reason, that pushed a button on me. And I started asking people, sometimes people I hardly even knew, what do you know about Frankenstein? One guy told me on a bus, he said, well, he had a square head and a nail through it. I said, a nail through it? Well, he meant the electrodes on the neck. Another one said, oh, in my piano lesson school, he said, I'm going as Frankenstein to a Halloween party. And I meant building up the forehead and everything. And that's when I started learning about the forehead. Well, anyway, then there was a Dick Briefer comic book, which was a really hideous looking monster. And I said, well, gee, if I'm going to see the movie, I don't want to see that face on the screen because that's what I thought he looked like. And then there was also, I used to look at the movie section in the Chicago Sun-Times when I was a kid. And there was one of the suburban strip shows had a show called Frankenstein and His Bride. So there was another. So I'm getting all this information about Frankenstein from different people. And then my aunt I asked her, she said, oh, and then there was The Bride of Frankenstein. Oh, there was more than just one movie. And then one day a friend of mine came over to my house, about a year and a half younger than me. And he said, guess what's going to play at the Mode Theater? The Mode Theater was this rundown Fleabag theater in Chicago. We used to see for 10 cents, we see 7 movies, plus a Three Stooges comedy and some hours with the trailers and cartoons. And he's House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula and The Mummy. Well, at first I was a little reluctant. I was afraid that the face I was going to see on the screen of the monster was going to be the Dick Briefer comic book face, but in real life, I didn't want to see that. But I finally got brave enough. I went. And that's where it all really started because, as I said, the continuity between the two movies, the atmosphere, the ambiance, the look. And in those days, the way I remember those Universals, they weren't just black and white. They were sepia toned. So there was kind of brownish look over everything. They weren't like the black and white you see on a DVD or a Blu-ray. And that whole thing just was, it all came together in my imagination. But that's how it started off, watching Tap Roots with Boris Karloff at the Music Box Theater.
Wow.
Well, you know, the amazing thing is, since we're talking about Frankenstein, you did some work on The Invaders. And you're probably not aware, but one of the best-selling back issues in Invaders history is issue 31 with the Nazi Frankenstein. It will not stay in stock. I'll put a run out, and someone will come along and they're like, I need this. I love this. I'm like, wow, okay, what? I have 5 copies. Why are you buying it again? You know,
that's news to me. I didn't know that, but I do know.
Yes,
that
it
was inspired
very
that
successful.
story.
Very successful.
The 1940s Prize Comics story arc, as they call it today, where Dick Briefer's Frankenstein was captured by the Nazis and turned into like a Nazi monster with the Gestapo uniform and all that. So that was my Briefer.
Yeah. Well, again, it's an amazing back issue. And again, it's only beaten by the 2 issues that have Thor in it in regards to sales. So there's a lot of people out there that love that book because it's just like, it's like, wait a minute, Frankenstein is wearing a uniform. You know, again, it's just, I don't know.
I wrote a series of novels called The New Adventures of Frankenstein. And there were 11 that were been around for like 30, 40 years. But then I decided to write a final one called Frankenstein, the Final Horror. And in it, if you read between the lines, there's an because, I like to think of all these things and being in the same universe. And I've used the Frankenstein monster at Marvel, and then also in Gold Key in the Dr. Spector stories. But Dr. Spector takes place definitely in the 1970s, and the New Adventures of Frankenstein is today. And then, of course, you got the one during World War II. So if you read between the lines, at one point in Frankenstein, the Final Horror, I explain all that continuity, how they all come together and work, and how it all makes sense. And that was included in it. So I had a great time doing that too. But that was a tricky. I had to figure out, I'm going to do this. There's always a solution if you put your mind to it.
It's so awesome how you're one of the experts, one of the living experts on Frankenstein. It's remarkable, and I like I said, I love seeing you've been doing documentaries and for how long have you been doing it for those movies and the special editions and all that? That's been for years.
I guess as long as they've been doing bonus features and things. But it's funny you mentioned about being an authority. The way that came about, I had a pre-code Atlas horror comic. I think the story was called The Lonely Dungeon. And it was a Frankenstein story. And in it, there was a guy who was described in the story as a professor as the world's leading authority on Frankenstein. Okay. Now, I was really, again, a big Frankenstein fan. And I said to myself, and you're not going to believe this, but it's true. I said to myself, wouldn't that be great to be like that guy and be the world's leading authority on Frankenstein?
Oh, that's awesome.
It just became like an obsession after that. And, all these little esoteric trivial
facts.
That's
awesome.
I know most of them. And you got to be an authority on something, I guess. So that's what
you got it. I mean, that's so awesome. That's basically me, Stephen Niles' whole, our whole thing is we read it from the comics and we want to become something it captured us. And you actually did that too. I mean, that's so refreshing to hear. Oh man, that's so cool. It's awesome.
I really wanted to be a rock and roll star. Remember that?
Yeah.
With Penny Arkade, I almost was.
We need you as Frankenstein. We need Frankenstein. Don, okay. How Now, how did you tell me about the dinosaurs? Like, what? Now you're all of a sudden you wrote an encyclopedia for dinosaurs. Tell me how all that came about. Now you're a big dinosaur guy too. My God.
Well, the interest came when I was a little kid, like with most little kids. I was aware of dinosaurs because of comic books, Tarzan, a couple TV shows like Tom Corbett's Space Cadet and Space Patrol and Captain Video had dinosaurs at one time or another. There were pictures in our home encyclopedia, and my mother took me down to visit the Field Museum in Chicago. I saw some of those big skeletons and things. Well, it all came together really big time in 1953 when two things happened. One was the Joe Kubert, Norman Maurer Thor comic. The first issue of that came out. It was called 1 Million Years Ago, the first issue. And I just bought that, and it was falling apart by the time I was done reading it. And the other thing is, around the same time, the movie The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the Ray Harryhausen movie, came out in theaters. And I saw the movie and I read the comic, I think maybe the same day or at least the same week, because I remember we went to a drive-in movie theater and me taking the comic book with me to the drive-in movie theater on the way home from a visit to Starved Rock National Park. I don't know if it's a national park. But anyway, those two things really cemented the interest. As far as doing an encyclopedia, in the Thor comic book, they had this page. It's called Scrapbook of Prehistoric Animals, and one page would be tyrannosaurs, and would tell you all about a tyrannosaur. One of them stegosaurs. And then in the movie, there was a guy who was trying to identify the monster he saw in the Arctic, and a scientist came over with a big batch of photos. She said, "This is a batch of pictures of every known prehistoric animal," which of course is impossible. It'd been in the hundreds of thousands, but she had to stack them about that high. And so for years, I was hoping to find a book or something that had every dinosaur in it. And there was a kid he was sort of a rival of mine in collecting things, whatever. He told me that he went to the public library in Chicago and he saw a book called Encyclopedia of Dinosaurs. And for years, I bugged those librarians. I want to see this book. Well, but doesn't exist. It's not in our target. So finally, I was around 1969 or so. I was in my apartment in Hollywood. I was sitting there with Jim Danforth, the stop motion animator, and Tom Sherman, who was a miniature model builder for the movies. And I was telling them this story, and Jim was just ready to leave for England to make the Hammer film when dinosaurs ruled the earth. And I told them this story, and I was just starting my career as a writer at that point. And Jim said, or Tom said, "Why don't you write it yourself?" And I had learned at that point, from writing books, that the books that seemed to do best were the ones I wanted to read, but nobody had written them yet. And then rather than wait till somebody wrote an inferior version of that book, I best might as well do it myself and get it out of my system. And that's where the Dinosaur Dictionary came from. I started writing that. That led to the new Dinosaur Dictionary. And then I was sitting in a symposium at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, where all these paleontologists were getting up talking about their new discoveries and things. And I said, boy, those dictionaries I wrote, by comparison of what I know now, are pretty superficial and way out of date. I think it's time I did it right, going directly to the original research papers and things, getting it peer reviewed and all that. And that's when I started working on Dinosaurs, the Encyclopedia, which ended up being 8 volumes in length. I mean, it takes up a whole shelf on my books. And I stopped doing those a few years ago because now all the information you can get instantaneously on the internet. You don't have to wait a year for the book to come out when it's all out of date, So I figured I have a life. I'm spending too much time on these dinosaur encyclopedia volumes, and that's the whole story.
Wow. Okay, and winding this down, Steve, any last words for Mr. Glut?
Well, it's truly been very educational. Again, you've answered some questions and stuff that I've been thinking about since like 1985. It's a real pleasure, and of course, along with many of the people who are going to be watching this, we're probably extremely jealous that you were there in 1964 in the music thing. I mean, that's just totally, a lot of people are just going to be losing their minds. So again, I really thank you for coming on the show, giving us these nuggets of information, this first-hand information. And, maybe people, who have watched our podcast before, they may have not been aware of you, but they're damn well aware of you now.
Okay, can I mention my website? I've
Oh,
got
of course.
5, but the prime one that leads you to all the others, just simply my name, www.donaldfglut.com. And you'll learn more about me than you'll ever want to know. Ever.
Now,
quick question. Now I know a lot of your amateur films and stuff were put together in a DVD set. I was a teenage movie maker. Is that something that is still available?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
You can get it on
fantastic.
Amazon.
Perfect. Because I
Oh.
personally want to check it all out. I want to see your Spider-Man film.
Well, there's also an hour and a 45-minute documentary, I guess you might call it, where I sit down and I just tell you how the whole story, how I made those movies from the time I was 9 years old until I made the last one, with clips and behind the scenes and all kinds of props that I didn't throw away, stuff like that.
oh, and finally, Don, it is refreshing to hear, like, you are total fanboy from that time. Like, you took all this stuff that you loved and you got obsessed with each and everything, and you like absorbed it. And once again, like Steve said, you remind me of Rick Hoberg. You have done so many things that have changed people's lives that they don't know you are one the same. Don Glut, okay, but he did that. Oh, he did that too. Oh my God, you and Rick Hoberg have that parallel. That is, it's. You've done so many things, and plus you're such a fan of that stuff that it's, once again, you come from the vein of like Roy Thomas. Like, I mean, and you, it's just so remarkable how I would have been the same way. It's when it was real and when that stuff, and you are a product of that, and it's so refreshing.
I was born at the right age because I got into the last days of radio. I listened to Superman and the Lone Ranger and all those shows on the radio before TV. I got in the early days of television, so I got to see all the classic TV dramas and things. I got in the early days of rock and roll. I got to see Elvis on his first television appearance, on the Dorsey Show. And that was when rock and roll wasn't mainstream like it is today. It was, you had the choice of accepting or rejecting it as a new form of music, and everybody accepted it. And a lot of things like seeing the shock movies on television and the Hammer films, I was just the right age to see all those things as they were coming out, getting famous Monsters of Film Man, the great Steve Ditko Stan Lee comics and Jack Kirby's Stan Lee comics, Roy Thomas comics. I was at the right age and at the right place at the right time to read those. And I was thinking too, some years ago I was interviewed by the BBC, and they asked me, what are your hobbies? And I stopped to think about that. I don't have any hobbies, because all the hobbies I had, I turned into businesses and things, and professions, and made money off of them. And a lot of people who are talented artists and talented writers and actors and musicians and even athletes, whatever, they never take it beyond regarding any of those things as anything more than a hobby or a pastime. They immediately, when they turn 18 years old, they decide, well, it's time to settle down, get married, have a family, and take that job in my father's electronics shop or something, And me, I didn't want any of that. I loved what I did, and I want to make my living off of it. And if you stick to it, if you don't give up, if you learn to take rejection like a grain of salt, because you get rejected for a lot of reasons besides your talent or your worth as a human being or whatever. You know, you can make it. But a lot of people just give up. And I see so many of my contemporaries now, people who are younger than me, but who were in the business the same time I was, the comics or movies or whatever, and they just given up. They've thrown in the towel. They're resting on their past laurels. I look at the Facebook pages. This is all stuff they did 40 years ago. And I don't care what people think about me personally, but one thing I don't want to be regarded as a has-been. I want people to know I'm still working, having a good time working, and I'm going to continue to working. I want to die working. I want to die between the words action and cut on the movie set, you know. And that's you know, I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, you applied yourself. That was I mean, you had the talent, but it was almost like you absorbed it so much, you had to get it out, like in some way, and you always applied yourself. So you, like you said, with the hustle and always going, and you fell into one thing, you met a new person, and people could see that passion in you. And I commend you for that. It's just really awesome to see. It's refreshing to see that, Don.
So many people way more talented than me never use those talents. You know, if they're an artist, they might doodle or something in an envelope or something, but that's about it. When they could be doing great artwork or something else, you know, great music. It's too bad. We lose a lot of talent that way. A lot of it because in school, their guidance counselor will say, "Oh, nobody succeeds in doing that," you know. And I've had experience. I've talked to classes in my high school and in English. I remember once. This is when Reagan was president, and I was telling him and one guy raised his hand and he said, "Well, that sounds all fine and dandy. We know we're from Illinois, and we know none of us are ever going to amount to anything." So the president came from Illinois, you know, and they've already made up their mind what they're going to do at that age. You know, like 16, 17 years old, they're going to work in a supermarket bagging groceries or something. I can't imagine doing the same thing 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, every week, and until you're too old to do it anymore. You do the same thing. That would kill me.
Yeah. Well, Jane Foster-Thor and Frankenstein, thank you, and all those dinosaurs, thank you. And Don, really quick, what dinosaur is Steve? Like, what does he have in him? I want to know. You're the expert here. What do you think, Steve?
I'm a mammal. I can't be a reptile.
I don't know, Steve.
Yeah, I'm not really in the mammal so much, especially hominid. So I can't really.
Okay, Steve, get us out of here. Mighty Mystic Milner. Jane Foster's Milner.
Boom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.